do that transition to 350 to 500 employees, that switch over to a medium-sized corporate and small enterprise, if you don't have your culture right then, that's where the rot sets in. Yeah, it's not going to help you that much while you're doing it, but as you do that transition, especially if you're high tech, high growth, it will pay so many dividends down the line. When my son was 2.5 years old, within 2 days, his eyes completely crossed. We were in the ear, nose and throat hospital down here and really worried that he was going to go blind or something like that.
You and your wife were worried?
Yeah, we were really worried. Yeah, because Victoria is the third most dangerous fire state in the world. So the south of Spain is the worst.
Okay.
Closely followed by California, and then Victoria is number 3. And the reason that you'd think Queensland would be, that's where it's hot, right?
I never knew that, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing is, up in Queensland, they don't get the actual undergrowth as much as we get. So because we're cooler in the winter, we get that growth, yeah? Now, Tasmania gets even more, but Tasmania doesn't fully dry out. So Victoria is just in that sweet spot where we get lots of growth and lots of drying out. And it's dry growth that creates the fuel.
Welcome to the Victory Lion Podcast. Lion!
Today is about the power of you. You will change the world.
And now your host,
O.P. Jayasinghe.
Mr. Stuart French, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Great to finally catch up.
Thank you. I knew we'd do this one day as soon as I met you. So here's my story on how I met you, right? Obviously, we met via Teams and we had that chat and you started talking about a whole bunch of stuff. And we ended the conversation and I rang Darren straight away and go, "You've got a good one."
Really?
And he goes, "Yep, I know. And I knew straight away. I'm just like, this guy's just such a valuable resource. And I don't mean to call you a resource, but you know what I mean.
No, I get it. I get it.
Valuable person who could add so much value. And I knew one day I was going to share this somehow with everybody, but this obviously happened. And so I appreciate you coming and having a chat with me.
Well, that's very kind. Let me tell you the opposite side of that story. So I started at Energy Safe and was really excited in a new job. And I've mentioned to you before, one of the jobs as a knowledge manager is to be an evangelist, because most people have never heard of knowledge management or often think of knowledge as just information they've remembered, right? Yeah. And so when I land in a new place, whether I'm a contractor or a full-timer, I'm looking for champions. I'm looking for people who have that charisma, that can talk to other people, that are smart enough to get it, and can see the bigger picture, not just what's in front of them right now.
Okay.
So 2 minutes in, I tagged you. and then you broke my heart saying you were leaving the place 2 weeks later. So thanks very much.
I remember that, yeah. All transformation projects
they come to an
end sooner or later, but I actually enjoyed my time there. It was good, and I'm glad you're staying there. And
it's a fantastic culture.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And you've got a beautiful team.
I do, and I've got not just a good team, but the executive. In general, they appreciate complexity, so they know that you can't just wham something in over here and have it not affect everything else. Yeah. Especially the CEO, she gets that. She understands. I'm managing an organization, which is an organism, not a machine.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And you can really see that in the way she works, the way she talks to people, the way she manages. Yeah. So,
it is a good one, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, you're very lucky, and I hope you get to stay there a long time, build those relationships. Yeah. No doubt Darren will look after you as well, which is good.
And save a bunch of lives. That's why we're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole point. Now, let's go back a few decades. Let's not go specific, but tell me about your childhood. Tell me about little Stuart.
So little Stu grew up on a dairy farm down in Gippsland.
Okay.
Our farm almost backed onto the Sale RAF base. Okay. And so I grew up listening to roulettes going overhead and F-111 bombers and all that awesome stuff. So I loved planes from very early. And I was a bit of a weird kid. I loved to understand how things worked.
Okay.
So I would spend hours just pulling stuff apart. I had a special. My mum's not watching this, is she?
She might be.
I had a special hidey hole above my cupboards where I hid things that I'd pulled apart and couldn't get back together again. And so all those things I was embarrassed because I'd pretty much broken them, and a lot of them weren't mine. And but that's how I worked out what worked and what didn't. And so, for example, dairy farm. So you got most of the cows on the main farm, and then we had a back paddock just I don't know, about 1.5 kilometres down the road.
Okay.
So each morning we would walk the cows up to milk, and then each night we would walk them back down to the other paddock next to the ref base.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was rain. It'd get muddy, So
Yeah.
so you run 150 cows out through there. You end up with all these cow prints, and then it rains, and they all fill up with water. So I'm straight back out there, get the cows back in, come back down, and then I've got a stick, and I'm looking at the levels of the water in all the pats and working out, all the cow prints, working out how I can break walls in each of those to make the water run from the highest level one to the lowest level one, and then out into the drainage channel, right?
That's
Well, that's an hour and a half's work.
there you go.
So, but that sort of thing, those sort of puzzles, I loved. And all of my uncles and aunties, they would buy me puzzles for every birthday, to solve and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I just loved the way things fit together. And fast forward 40 odd years, I've got 2 amazing young daughters that are neurospicy. And it's probably pretty obvious that I am a bit too. So
The good ones are always right.
So the writing's on the wall now, but of course that, you talk about, autism spectrum and that sort of stuff. That didn't exist back then, and so I'll talk about it a bit later because
Sure.
there was a way I found out about that,
Okay.
and it's an important part of how I actually do my work today.
There you go.
But needless to say, I drove my teachers insane.
Because of your inquisitiveness?
Constant questions. I was the kid that asked why 10,000 times.
Because you needed to know how things
Need
work.
to know. So when I was about 10, I think, my dad and mum, I still don't know what inspired, probably just to stop me asking them why, they bought me a full set of World Book encyclopedias. And so I read them.
Wow.
So 7 feet
Yep.
of encyclopedias. I
Well, I've
read
known
from
a-
one end to the other.
I've known a lot of people who've had them, but not many people who've read them.
Yeah.
So
Then, and before that, I had this amazing yellow book called The Book of Why.
okay.
And my grandkids now have that book, right? And I love that book. Now it's radically out of date now.
Yeah.
Because we've learnt so much through science and everything. But back then, that really caught my attention of, that's linked to that and that's linked to that. And
So you're like 10 years old at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
so then my dad sold the farm and moved to another farm. And when we did that, we actually changed schools, and grade 6 I moved into Araluen School in Sale.
Okay.
So it was on the outskirts of Sale, but it's just a small primary school. And when I did that, I got to meet a guy called Dale. And Dale's stepfather, ran the local computer store.
Okay.
So he had this shed out the back. Oh, that shed was just amazing. He was the president of the Australian Super 80 Users Club. So Super 80 was a Z80 based home built computer. You bought a kit and you soldered it all together. You built it yourself, right?
I've heard about this, but I've
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was the president of the club, the Super 80 Users Club.
Amazing.
And so there was so many of these things and all different things, and he would bring stuff in from the United States. And I remember one Christmas holidays, we spent 6 weeks in the back of the shop building 500 floppy disk drives
Okay.
for sale.
For sale. Okay. Yep.
So soldering them all up, pre-formatting, tuning the heads, everything,
Jeez.
So that was awesome. So and we'd spend 6 months doing software and then 6 months doing hardware.
Okay.
So a lot of assembly coding, and then later on in using BASIC, and then Turbo Pascal and a whole bunch of those old languages that people have never heard anymore.
And this isn't the smaller floppy disks. These are the big boys, right? 5 1/4 inch.
Yeah, 5 1/4 and the 8-inch ones before that.
8-inch. Okay, so that's
way
before
back.
me. Before.
So and I'm not that old,
Oh.
but I started young, right?
Yeah.
So I've got a good
course.
sort of 40 years of
Tech
computing
stuff.
tech
Yeah.
stuff. And one of the rules, I've always remembered this, one of the rules that Bill had on us was that we could use all his stuff, we could access all his tools, we could use all the computers.
Okay.
So unfettered access.
I feel like there's a but coming.
There's a but. We were not allowed to play any games unless we built them ourselves.
That's pretty cool. Okay.
So Dale and I started learning to program. So I'd write one and then he'd play it, and he'd write one and I'd play it. And we go backwards and forwards.
That's amazing.
And we'd write it and we'd deliver. Okay, it's game day. And
Yeah.
I'd load it up, and then I'd sit there like this. Is he going to go left? Did he see the chest? Is he going to open the chest?
Wow.
And because I know in that chest is a key, which then opens the dungeon. In the dungeon is a prisoner, and that prisoner will tell you the password to, and I've mapped all this up. And of course, it wasn't graphical, it was all text. So
Yeah.
I'd given him a A3 piece of paper with the map drawn on it, right? And
this is making so much sense, by the way, because you just told me about the AI games and how times have changed.
Yeah.
Okay, please continue.
Absolutely. So around that time, a couple of things happened. I joined the Air Training Corps as a cadet, which I absolutely loved, and I excelled at that, and wanted to be a F-18 pilot. That was my dream.
That's a dream.
At the same time, I was really getting into coding, and of course, year 8 we discovered sine, cosine, tan
Okay. Yep.
geometry, right? So I decided that I was going to actually program a flight simulator, write my own flight simulator. Of course, the graphics were terrible. At this time, I had a Dick Smith System 80, so another Z80, 16 kilobytes of RAM,
Kilobytes.
and used the black and white TV as the monitor. And so I wrote a simple thing with a X, Y, and Z for altitude, and a pitch, yaw, right, situation and thrust. And then I would take off, you'd pull back on the stick, it would lift your pitch back up, and your Z axis would go up and your Y, because you're traveling along this way, and then you'd bank and you'd turn and you'd see the X axis start to run.
Yeah.
And the Y start to slow down because you're coming along this axis. I had a ball writing that. And
How old were you then? Maybe 20-ish? Maybe earlier?
no, this was 12,
Oh, young cadets.
12, 13, yeah.
That's very young. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so that got me thinking, I can have some fun with this. And so what happened then? I was at a mate's place, and I went to tech school. So I was a tech boy. And so we were doing woodworking and welding and all these cool things. And my mate went to grammar. And it's interesting because he ended up being a professor at Melbourne University.
There you go.
So he's a very, very smart guy. Andrew, his name was. I went over there and he actually explained the unit circle to me, and it was actually him that taught me about sine, cosine, tan, not the teachers. They refused to teach me because you don't learn that until year 9.
Okay.
And I'm like, can't wait. Writing a flight simulator. Need it now. So he taught me. So, but he had homework. So he said, all right, I got to go. I got to go do the homework. Just do whatever. So I played with the dog a bit. And then I was bored. So I walked inside and they had this, in the foyer, they had a bookshelf. And on the bookshelf was a book of 101 games from around the world. And I started flipping through it.
Yep.
Came across a game called Go.
I've heard of Go.
You've heard of Go?
I've heard of Go. I can't remember what it does, but I have heard of it.
Right. So it's huge. Millions of players in Asia. Not really popular here in Australia or Western countries, but I took a liking to it. I still don't know why. There was 101 games in that book. I have no idea why I fixated on Go,
Yeah.
but there was something about it.
So when you say a book, what did it have? Is it just...
It just had the basic rules of how to play it.
Okay.
So I scribbled them down and went home and started working out how to play Go.
Ah, Go as in like the chess equivalent,
Chess equivalent.
Of the... Yeah, of course.
So
Yes,
most people know
yes.
Go now because of the 2016 challenge between AlphaGo, the AI, and Lee Sedol, the Korean grandmaster, right?
There you go.
And so, and I watched every one of those games. That was a very exciting time for me where other people in my life knew what Go was. It was very cool. So, of course, the internet didn't exist back then. So I just had to work it out and then teach my friends so I could play against my friends so I had someone to play against.
Okay.
So I played on and off ever since I was 15.
So you programmed Go from scratch?
No. I just like playing it because it forced me to think.
Yeah.
It has an amazing effect on your memory.
For some reason, I thought you looked at the rules and decided to
Yeah,
program
no,
them. Yeah, okay.
I never did work that out, and it would have been a waste of time me trying because the reason I loved Go was I'd played chess before that, and chess had a whole bunch of rules.
Yep.
And for those who don't know, Go has 2 rules, right? So you can't commit suicide,
Okay.
and you can't play a move which returns the board to its immediately previous state.
Okay.
And that just stops the infinite loops,
Okay.
right? There's an ancient Chinese story about 2 dragons playing Go and they get in a Ko situation and 10,000 years later they're still playing the Ko, right?
Okay.
So there's a rule that says, no, you're not allowed to do that.
Yep.
But that's it. They're the only rules. Everything else emerges from the structure of the board and the stones and the way they interrelate with one another.
Yep.
And that idea tickled me because as a person who sees patterns, that's what I see in the world.
Okay.
No one built that bush over there. No one made that shape. It emerged that way. But the way this garden has been kept and fertilized and watered has impacted the way that bush has emerged in that shape.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So I saw that at school. I saw that at Air Cadets. I saw that in my family. I saw that with the way the pets play with one another. I saw that with the way the herd of cows comes in through the narrow gate and comes into the shed, right?
Yep.
So I'm seeing these complex patterns. And then, of course, you get into later years, year 10, 11, 12, you start looking at higher level maths. And I ended up doing Maths A, Maths B, Physics, Chem for year 12.
School, yeah.
And, of course, they all want rigid rules. But the whole time I'm thinking, yeah, but the world's not rigid.
Where is it now? Yeah.
The world is emergent.
Yep.
So let me come back to that.
Okay.
So when I was 13, I was sitting down watching TV, and I later on found out it was a Canadian show. And it was about a kid who was mucking around on the school computers, and he accidentally developed, because of I think a apple juice / electrocution incident, an artificial intelligence.
Is this fiction?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the artificial intelligence was called Gregory, and off it went. And I don't know whether you remember, but there was a movie, I think you can actually still watch it on Disney Plus. It's called The Computer Who Wore Tennis Shoes.
I haven't heard of it.
And it's about this kid who's got a computer brain and can calculate 1,000,000 times a second, and he's super smart, and these corporations are trying to get him, the university's trying to get him, and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And that got me interested in computers and how does this stuff work. But then when I watched this show, it made me realize, well, not realize. I mean, it's realized now because we saw what happened, right? But back then it was just made me think that everyone in AI was doing it wrong. Because you're an arrogant young guy, so why wouldn't you think that? And I thought, if you're going to build an AI, you need to teach it like a child. You need to train it.
Okay. Yep.
You don't give it a bunch of rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a rules engine. That's not an AI.
Yep.
So at 13, I remember, don't ask me why, sitting on the toilet with a pad and a pen for 2 hours, writing my idea of what AI was.
Was the concept of AI as we know it today, spoken about like we are today? Not really, right? No.
But it was spoken about in terms of a computer that can think like a human.
Okay. So that knowledge was available.
Well, it was based on the Turing tests, right?
What's that?
So Turing was an amazing mathematician that worked on the Enigma code breaking team. So if you've ever seen the movie with Benedict Cumberbatch,
I haven't seen it.
what's the movie called? You'll have to put it on the screen above me right now.
Yeah.
It's right there. He actually built one of the first computers to crack the code of the Enigma and work out how to understand what these secret codes were that the Germans were sending in World War II. And in later life, he put forward this idea that an AI, you could tell if something was really an AI if you could put it in a room with a typewriter, right? And then I can ask it questions and the answers get typed back to me on a piece of paper. And when I read it, I can't tell the difference between the AI or a human on the other side of that screen. That's a Turing test, right?
Okay. So if the test is passed, then?
It's an AI.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Because it fooled you.
Got it.
And so Turing was an amazing scientist, and I encourage you to watch the movie.
Yeah,
it's an incredible movie. Unfortunately, he was gay.
Okay.
And he was chemically castrated for his crime of being gay.
Mm-hmm.
Good old bloody. And committed suicide, which was a massive loss for the human race.
Absolutely. Huge
Loss. And it just makes me so sad to hear some of these stories and terrible things that happened. So I've got Go and I've got AI. So I'm sort of collecting these things that later on I would then pull all back together. I had no idea what I was doing at the time. I was just exploring lots of things.
Yeah.
I was investigating these things. I ended up getting an apprenticeship. So when I finished year 12, rather than going to university, I got a radio technology apprenticeship. So back then there was no such thing as a computer technician. So you're a radio technician and you specialised in computers. So I have never fixed a radio in anger once in my life, even though that's my trade.
Which suburb? Location?
So that was at Longford gas plant, which is also the helipad where all the helicopters fly out to the rigs in Bass Strait, and I worked in the offshore support group. So we supported the oil rigs in Bass Strait.
There you go.
So we worked on cathodic protection, ripple protection, calibrators, and maintaining PCs and networks and 71 meg radio bearer systems for the telemetry to go across.
Jeez. Not to date you, but what decade?
So this is 1989.
Okay.
So the end of the great 80s.
Yeah.
So I was really lucky to do my whole teenage years through the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I consider myself very, very blessed.
Yes.
89, 90, 91, 92 were my years with ESSO. Okay. So lots of flying around in helicopters. I wrote, one of the first software I wrote for ESSO was the helicopter weight allowance application. So it was an app that you put in the platforms that you're going to fly to, you put in the wind direction and speed, the QNH, the air pressure, and which helicopter it was, because each helicopter had a lift profile. which we embedded into the software. And then we put in the pilots' names and their weights, so they had to be weighed every month, right?
Wow.
And then the weights of the cargo plus people on board.
Okay.
So unlike, when you go to the airport, you check your bags and then you go through and you go on and they actually weigh your bags.
Yep.
Well, when you fly in a helicopter, they weigh all of you. You and your bags stand there on the weigh scale and they calculate exactly how many kilos are on that helicopter, right?
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, so we would put all that into the thing and then it would calculate exactly how much fuel it needed and then how much safety margin fuel you needed.
So this is something that you wrote.
I wrote that, yeah.
Okay.
So the pilots would do all that and this is important, after they'd done their manual calculations, they would put it into the software and it would double check them.
Ah.
They did not trust the software.
Yep.
And that's a lesson for us in our AI world.
Okay.
You do the working out, use AI to double check your
Double
work.
check it. I
Yeah?
like it. I like it.
So they were doing that back then. And of course, you get that wrong, your helicopter's in the ocean, right? So it's important.
It's important.
It's important. So I did 4 years there, ended up transferring my last year to the IT, the GIS team, and moving up here to Melbourne. So as a 21-year-old, I moved to Melbourne
Yep.
and worked at Melbourne Central, which was awesome fun. So going from living on a farm to working on the 40th floor in the middle of Melbourne City.
There you go.
So that was a lot of fun.
What did you do there?
So I was first and second level help desk support.
Okay.
So sometimes I'd be on the phone, sometimes I'd be wandering around the building
Yep.
working with things.
So all this time, your inquisitive mind was still looking, learning.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that point, I was enamored with space,
Okay.
wanted to work for NASA, and
So cool.
and somehow I won Apprentice of the Year at Victoria Uni, and then got Victorian Apprentice of the Year, all trades, which was $16,000 and airplane tickets anywhere in the world.
Wow.
So that was
That's pretty good.
That was amazing. I still don't think I should have won it. There was a guy there who had finished his apprenticeship in his third year and owned 3 hairdressing salons by the time he'd finished his 4th year. Like, the people I was up against were pretty amazing. I still don't think I should have won it. But anyway, I won it. So it was awesome. So I'm walking down off the stage. I'd just been handed my prize by the Governor General. And there's this guy standing at the bottom of the stage, 5'3" or 4", in this shiny metallic silver suit. Not chrome, just silver,
Silver
right?
suit. Yeah.
He puts out his hand and says, "Congratulations on your win, Stuart." And I said, "Thank you very much."
Who
And
are
then
you?
there's this uncomfortable silence.
Because you didn't know who this person was.
And he says, "You have no idea who I am, do you?" And I just laughed. I said, "I'm sorry, I got no idea. I really apologise." He goes, No, it's fine. He said, "My name's Brian Finn. I'm the CEO of IBM Australia.
Wow.
You mentioned in your speech that you want to work for NASA. I used to work for NASA. Here's my card. Call me in the morning and I will get you into NASA if you choose to go to the US with your prize." So at that point, I'm going to the US with my prize, right? So I called his secretary the next morning. They got me into Houston. They got me into the Canaveral,
Yep.
Kennedy Space Center. They got me into the IBM Supercomputing Center in Houston. I got to meet the commander that was the first commander of the Endeavour shuttle,
Yep.
who had just got back that morning from Australia, where he had dinged the champagne bottle on the new Endeavour
Okay.
and christened it as it was launched in Perth. And he was like, "I can't believe this. I've just come back from Australia and I get back as an Australian here, right?" He spoke to us for like 2 hours. He was brilliant. We got taken into mission control. So that, that bit in all the movies with the big screens and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah,
So we got taken in there.
So cool.
And I was flying gliders at the time through the Air Training Corps.
Yep.
So they put me in the simulator for the
Just for kicks.
for the shuttle,
Okay.
and I landed it first time
Very nice.
with no engines.
Okay.
So they put me in the emergency situation, and I landed
And
it.
you landed it.
So that movie, Space Cowboys,
Yep.
where Tommy Lee Jones lands it with no computers,
You did it.
that's me.
Okay.
So when I saw that movie, I was like,
Yes.
yes, done that. So I'm not sure I'd be so good in the real thing though, you know.
Yeah, but you know
but,
what?
you know.
Hey.
Yeah, so there you go. So that's the life of Stu up to 20. That's
That's
everything
quite a
happened.
life.
That was-
That's not bad at all. You summed it well. Summed it well. I am interested in some of the learnings that you had, especially with the Yarra water.
Yarra Valley
Water.
water. Yeah. So I worked for state government, federal government, a whole bunch of big and small organisations.
Yep.
And
Is
to be
this
honest
when
with
the
you-
knowledge management kicked in?
Yeah, exactly right. So I'd been working as an IT manager, and I'd helped grow a Melbourne company from 5.3 million turnover when I first started to 280 million turnover when I left.
Jeez.
So that was amazing, and managed most of the IT for that during a good part of that.
Okay.
But I kept running into, in my career, situations where I deliver an IT project on time, on budget, everything what I was asked to do, but then it would fall over and run into troubles. And I could never put my finger on what the problem was. And what happened was there was, and people who live in Melbourne may remember this, but it was about 1998, 1997, and the Visy recycling plant up in Roxburgh Park caught on fire. They had these big sort of 10-metre cubed bales of compressed cardboard. You've seen them, right? The big
I've seen
cardboard,
them,
and it's all compressed, and they've got the wires around them holding them. Well, a couple of these things caught on fire, and the fire just bounced from one to one. They had a couple of huge water cannons, but nowhere near enough to put it out.
Put it out.
They ended up with 30 appliances, 30 fire trucks on site, plus the cannons. The problem is, up at Roxburgh Park, it's really on the outside of Melbourne.
Yeah.
And it's only a 300 mil main. So they sucked that thing dry.
Okay.
It just couldn't get enough
Couldn't get
water to get onto the fire. And so I'm working for Yarra Valley Water at the time as a mapper, as a drawing maps. And I had no idea where that part of my career was going, but I was loving it. Drawing maps is just an absolute passion of mine. It's a visual representation of how things are connected.
Okay.
So I love doing that. And anyway, get the call. John, the senior engineer, he jumps in his car, lights flashing, flies over to Roxburgh Park and turns on what's called a shut-off valve. And so you've probably never thought about this, but have you noticed different houses that you're in have different pressures of water
Yep.
in them? Yeah?
Absolutely.
Well, that problem is actually a major problem. And you can very easily blow taps off and everything with the water pressure. So what they do is they divide a city up based on altitude. And so they'll have a base level, sea level, so that's one level of pressure. But then anything above,
Sea
so many
level.
meters,
Yep.
50 meters or whatever, anything above there up to 100 meters is another level. And then you'll have hills where there's another level on top of that. And on top of the hills, you'll have a tower which is feeding the top of the hill, right? And so there are all these different levels.
Different pressures.
Correct. And these things called zones have shut-off valves. So the pipes are connected between the two zones,
Yep.
but there's shut-off valves where the pipes go to stop this pressure getting into that pressure, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
blowing all the taps off.
I'm following you.
Yeah?
Yep.
So what he did is they had the fire down here, and he opened this shut-off valve, which then, dropped the pressure, and the pressure ran down, and all of a sudden they had all the
Had all
water
the
and they got
pressure.
the fire out.
So how did he know to do that?
Yeah, good question. So that's exactly the question I asked him the next day, because it was his retirement party.
Okay.
And everyone's standing around, and he's telling the story of how he dug through 3 inches of bitumen to find the valve head.
On that day?
On the day, because a normal valve, I'm sure you've seen the square things,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's a valve, right? And down underneath is a 6-foot high, huge, big
Yep.
water valve. But shut-off valves, they're often under roads, and because they're never used, they just get, as the road gets maintained, they just get buried.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
So I said to him, 3 inches of bitumen. How'd you find the valve? He says, oh, easy. We got the map. And as it turns out, I'd done the Roxburgh Park map just a couple of weeks before.
Because you were the map guy, right?
Because I'm the map guy. So
Yeah.
I've just got this giant big, because then when we finished the map in the CAD software, we would print a copy out, because if the power goes out, you still need to be able to respond, right? So I go and get this A0 map and we lay it out on the table. And he goes, right, here it is. There's the high level. Here's the low level. There's the street. There's the shut-off valve.
Right in the middle.
He said, so I went to the tree on the footpath,
Yeah.
and I went out at 45 degrees from the tree with my metal detector, and I found it. So I said, John, how'd you know about the tree? He goes, oh, that tree was a sapling when I put the valve in 40 years ago.
And he remembered,
Knowledge, right?
and was it on the map?
So I said, John, that tree's not in the database. And he pulled the finger out on me and he said, that tree was written on the field card with a map, but UIT guys decided that wasn't important.
There you go.
And when he said that to me, I just had one of those epiphany moments where knowledge and information are not the same thing.
Yeah.
They're different and you manage them differently.
So for anyone that's listening to this is important. Really pay attention now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had no idea that what that insight was going to do to my entire career, and now of course I'm world known knowledge manager. I'm speaking in Dublin in a couple of weeks' time, and
awesome.
and all that stuff. But I had no idea at the time that this was important. I just was like, oh, I'm going to have to take that into account.
Yeah.
So fast forward a couple of years, now I'm at this company that we're building, the Melbourne company around the world, having these problems with projects. So I start saying, hold on, I'm trying to use technology to solve a knowledge problem. I'm using the wrong tools. I should be using communities or workshops and facilitation.
Or champions or
Or
evangelists.
champions, or or the number of other tools we use as knowledge managers, and so at that time, I was working with two amazing gentlemen. To this day, I have utmost respect for both of them. Both microbiologists.
Okay.
One of them helped co-found the company, and the other one was the head microbiologist for the whole worldwide rollout, and was quite easily one of the smartest people I've ever met.
Right.
Both of these gentlemen came to me within a month of each other. They were both in their mid to late 60s, and they said to me, I'm starting to think about retirement.
Okay.
Can you think about how we capture my knowledge?
Amazing.
So when I retire, the company keeps going.
So at this point in time, was the concept or the concept of a knowledge manager, was that known? Do you know what I mean?
It was known, but I didn't know it.
Okay.
And to this day, I don't know, given everything I know now and how amazing it is at solving the problems I'd been putting up with for 10 years.
Yeah.
I have no idea how I didn't just stumble across it,
Okay.
but I didn't.
Yep.
So I'm rumbling along. My boss at the time calls me in and says, you've just done this big multi-million-dollar international rollout and done a fantastic job, but we don't really need you on that anymore.
And this was early 2000s?
Yeah. And he said, but at this point, you probably know more about our operations globally than any other person in the organization except the CEO.
Okay.
So have a look around. If you see a problem that you think would help us if we solve that problem, let's talk about it and maybe we'll create a position for it, right? So straight away, I'm thinking of these two old guys, right? And I'm thinking, oh, I'd really like to solve that knowledge problem, right? So I went around to my desk and I Googled managing knowledge. And 150,000 websites about knowledge management.
Came
And
up.
I'm like, what's going on here? How can something this big exist and me not know about it, right?
Yeah.
So I found knowledge management. I started a master's degree with the University of South Australia. I actually applied
There you go.
and they said no, because I didn't have an undergraduate. So I went across to, I talked to the Victorian Uni where I did my trade, all my TAFE work, and they helped me put in my application to University of South Australia, citing 14 years experience in the field and Victorian Apprentice of the Year and all that sort of stuff. And I got on through a equivalency program.
Exception. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were still working at this time, full time.
Still working full time. So I'm supporting the UK, US, Canada, South Africa, Melbourne, and all of Australia and New Zealand, and doing a master's degree online.
Okay.
So 70 to 80 hours a week working, and then another 35 hours a week studying.
Family as well?
And yes, a brand new third child had just arrived.
Wow. Okay. Continue.
It was a mad time.
I can imagine.
Absolutely mad time. And I take my hat off to people who study as an adult and do the hard thing, because it was really
full
hard. But here, now we're going to start pulling it all together, right?
Yep.
So a strange thing happened. I'm in a master's degree with a bunch of people who have degrees. I don't even know what the literature is as a thing.
Yep.
So I'm having to learn all that stuff you learn when you do your degree. I'm having to learn that as well as do the master's degree. So Wikipedia and Google were my best friends, and they were fairly new back then, but they were growing fast, and I was a part of that.
Yep.
And so this really strange thing started happening. So each week we would have an online briefing. We would then go away, do all the readings and study. And then at the end of the week, we would have a summary online with all the students together. And week after week after week, on the initial one, I was the dumbest person in the room. But by the end of the week, I was the top student mark.
Okay.
To the point where my wife and I used to laugh about it. And the reason we laughed about it was because it was complete and absolute luck that this was happening week after week. So I remember week 3, and this one's important to me. Week 3, we got introduced to a guy called David Snowden.
Okay.
First, we were introduced to Brenda Devon, who passed away not long ago, and she was an incredible person in the sense-making field. Really an amazing researcher and a great person. And we then were introduced to Dave, and Dave took sense-making further into complexity theory, and which is a subset of chaos theory, right?
Yep.
And so I got my first, dip my toe in the water of emergence and complexity and all those tools, strange attractors and boundary conditions and all that sort of fun stuff. Definitely didn't come across any of that during my apprenticeship. But I took to it like a fish to water. And there were people there with like really, really smart people in the course who were just flunking this part. They just could not get their head around what complexity theory was and how it worked. Anyway, as coincidences go, Dave Snowden, and you can work out when this was because you can look through Dave's blog and you'll find it.
Okay.
Dave Snowden does these massive long blog posts, pages and pages long. But this day he just wrote a short one, and he wrote, "Chess is complicated. Go is complex."
Chess is complicated. Go is complex.
Complex. And we're studying complexity theory. And I went, wait a minute, am I getting this because I play Go? So I immediately contacted Dave out of the blue. He was probably like, who's this idiot from Australia?
Yeah.
And I said, Dave, you just posted something on your blog. I play Go. Would you mind, I'm doing my master's degree in knowledge management right now. Would you mind if I took that concept and ran with it? He said, go for it. I was just using it as an example. So I did. So I did a deep dive into how Go fits in the complexity space and complexity science and what that means, for managing human knowledge, not information, Do you understand? Not the stuff we write down, not the stuff in books or in databases. What we actually know. Because the bit I left out in my story before was when I was doing my apprenticeship, I was apprenticed by some of the top engineers in the world. ESO paid big dollar. And so we had in that building some of the most amazing people, and they coached us, they apprenticed us. So unlike a lot of places where you've got a master and you've got a couple of journeymen, you've got a bunch of apprentices, the journeymen actually do most of the training. And the master sits you down every now and then and sort of slacks you over the year or whatever.
There you go.
With us, we were trained by the masters. And often that doesn't work because the masters, I mean, you know, Keith Anderson, he was close to 65 at the time,
Yeah.
right?
What
Dealing with 18-year-olds.
What was your definition of a master? Like person who's been there, had got the tenure, the experience, the educational background, etc., etc.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of definitions. There's a thing called the Dreyfus scale, which is a scale from 1 to 5, and it goes through levels of competency, and the top level is master in that. But basically, it means that I like the Dave Snowden talks about the difference between a cook and a chef.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a cook can follow a recipe and cook you the perfect meal. Yeah.
Yep.
But a chef can open your pantry and invent something from what's available.
Ah.
Do you get the
Very
difference?
nice. I do.
So a journeyman is the cook, right? They'll never over or undercook an egg. They know all the bits.
Yep.
They can do all the bits.
Yep.
But a master can invent new knowledge.
Yep.
And so I always wanted to be the master. And so one of the things I learned during my apprenticeship is that relationship between masters and apprentices, because it's very different from a journeyman apprentice relationship. A journeyman will tell you what to do. They'll focus on how to do it. Yeah?
Yep.
Follow these steps, it all works, right? And they're able to teach the steps, but they can't always answer why.
Got it.
So let me tell you a quick thing, because in my first week, I got a taste of this.
Okay.
So I'm 18 years old, straight out of secondary school. There's 4 apprentices sitting in this room with this, to us, ancient guy.
Yep.
And he says, for the first 6 months, I'm going to be your apprentice supervisor. I'm going to close the door right now. If it was 2025, he said, I want to create a safe space for you.
Okay.
He didn't say that,
He
but
didn't
that's
say
what he was
that's
doing.
what he meant. Yeah.
And he said, I just want to let you know right now, you can let me know anything you're struggling with or you just don't get, that you're really having a hard time with. So you don't go out there and look stupid in front of the engineers, right?
It's pretty cool. Okay.
So everyone's dead silent. And me being a tad neurospicy and just interested in learning,
Yep.
I spoke up and I said, this is going to sound really stupid, but for some reason, after 4 years, I cannot remember Ohm's law.
Okay.
So for those of you who don't know, Ohm's law is the calculation of the relationship between voltage, current, and resistance, right? And it's a very simple, it's V equals IR. It's a very simple thing, but for some reason it just wasn't sticking. It was just at a block.
Yep.
So we're sitting in this room with Ken, the old guy,
Yep.
and he starts telling us a story. He says, 1956, I was in the Navy. I was stationed on a small island in the south of Tasmania, and we were on the lookout. This is only 10 years after World War II. So we're on the lookout for enemy ships and missiles. So we're running a radar installation, and there's a crew of us there. Yeah. So part of the radar installation was a large magnet that was made up of a superconducting ceramic. So there's this big coil, and they would put 25 amps through this coil.
This is after you asked him about the Ohm's law, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So we got 25 amps running through the coil. They generate that, they get it up, they turn on the refrigerator, which is a little diesel engine that would pump and cool this thing down. It'd cool down to like 20 degrees Kelvin
Okay.
and start superconducting, and with this 25 amps going through it, and then they would switch it over and the 25 amps would just go round and round because there's no resistance.
Right.
Yeah?
Yep.
So there's no voltage drop, so it just keeps going round.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
But because there is 25 amps, it's generating this massive magnetic field.
Okay.
I'm like, oh, I got that. He goes, so, one morning, it's morning tea, we're sitting inside, we're all having a cup of tea, when there's a massive explosion. We race outside and half the building is missing. We call in a missile strike. There's helicopters on the way. There's like the whole deal, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, they do an investigation and they find out what happened.
What happened?
The diesel engine that was running the refrigeration pump had died. So the coil had warmed up.
Okay.
It stopped superconducting, but it's still got 25 amps going through it. Now, 25 times 0 is 0.
Yep.
But 25 times 800 million ohms, which is what you get with, because it's basically turned into a cup and saucer
Yep.
ceramic,
Mm-hmm.
25 times 800 million was about 1,700 lightning bolts of voltage.
Okay. Yep.
So the building was effectively struck by a mega lightning bolt and blew the entire thing apart.
So there was no redundancy for the generator? Okay.
1956, mate. The point is, I'm 54 years old. I remember the story. I remember Ohm's law. I remember the room we were sitting in when he told it.
Amazing. And that's the
so
power of the master.
That's the power of a master using story, using dialogue, right?
Yep.
Using narrative.
Amazing.
And so I've crafted myself after that. I tell lots of stories. You can tell
Yeah,
by how many
yeah,
stories
yeah.
I'm telling now. As a knowledge manager, a lot of people don't really get knowledge management. They've been indoctrinated into an information age.
Yep.
And so they think of everything as information. They don't think of organizations as organisms. They think of them as mechanisms.
Yep.
And so information works in mechanisms. Knowledge works in organisms. And so...
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So information travels really well through hierarchies,
Yep.
which is why military uses it. But knowledge travels well through social networks.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Amazing.
So as a knowledge manager, you want to manage both of those because both are important.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you've got to evangelize. You've got to teach people these basics. You've got to tell these stories to where they have that aha moment of, oh yeah, no, that's actually how I work. That's exactly. In fact, that's why that project fell over last year, because we didn't take that into account. You know, I'm always trying to create those aha
Connections,
moments.
yeah.
Because once people understand the dynamics, once they get the landscape of knowledge, they often know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just making them realize what they don't know. Oh,
What's
well,
the nature? So you've got to map the landscape. So, for example, one of the projects I did at a recent role was I was working with people who were some of the most amazing managers of emergencies I've ever worked with. Their ability to work with so little information of a highly flux situation
Yeah.
and yet be able to make confident decisions and design outcomes that would save lives. Unbelievable, unmatched, never met anyone like them.
So this could be applied to anything, you know, banks where they have different branches, regional or rural.
Banks, military, church, any large organisation
Yeah.
that relies on the expertise of their people. Engineering organisations,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
So is there off-the-shelf solutions for this type of?
No, we custom built the whole thing. I wrote it all in SQL.
Okay.
SQL and Power BI.
So what would you recommend today to a, say, you know, small organization, to medium, to enterprise?
Hire a knowledge manager.
Okay. Okay.
So yes, but if you're a small organisation, and I cut my teeth in small to medium, right? And the beautiful thing we found, my research found, my master's thesis, was that there are three key stages that you go from a small, like a startup, into a medium.
Okay.
And those are 45 employees, different offices, so multiple sites,
Multiple sites. Okay.
or multiple time zones.
Okay. Yes, I'm following.
So when you hit those 3 milestones, you need to level up your knowledge management. Below all of these,
You just
you
start.
pretty much, everyone knows what everyone else is doing,
Okay.
right? So you don't really need too much of a knowledge management. That said, I have revised my standing on that over the last few years because I've seen quite a few medium level organizations who have bad knowledge practices baked into their culture.
Okay.
And if they keep growing, that becomes a really expensive cancer to cut out. Really expensive. And for a period of my career, I was going into large federal organizations and cutting out those cancers.
Okay.
And the whole time I was thinking, I wish I could be like a health doctor, like a nutritionist that would stop them getting sick in the first place. So now, small to medium, I advise people, don't hire a knowledge manager, but get one in to talk to you about what your plans are and make sure your culture's on par. Because when you do that transition to 350 to 500 employees, that switch over to a medium-sized corporate and small enterprise, if you don't have your culture right then, that's where the rot sets in.
Right.
So yeah, it's not going to help you that much while you're doing it, but as you do that transition, especially if you're high tech, high growth, it will pay so many dividends down the line. And so in the company that I was working in, I got a phone call 2 years ago from the head of IT. And he was very kind to call me out of the blue after a decade. And he said, I just want to let you know I got a phone call this week. We have a new IT guy working in the Chicago office. And out of the blue, he called me to thank me for the way the company runs. He said, I've never worked in an organization where it was so easy to find out what's going on anywhere in the world.
Wow. So this is the organization that you set up and left, right?
And he said, I just want you to know that's what you built 14 years ago.
Amazing.
And
Well
it's
done.
still noticeable enough 14 years later for a brand new employee 2 weeks in to call their boss and remark on it. And so that's, wherever I go, I'm trying to recreate that.
That is amazing because I'm yet to go into an organization where that has been the case. It's been the complete opposite, unfortunately.
Yeah. So we lucked out because I did my master's degree while we were still a small company. So I set the path right.
Yeah.
It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough.
was
We
good.
put in a 17,000, well, it grew to 17,000 page wiki by the time I left, that was multinational, that had everything from legal to IT to operational stuff in it. We had stuff for truck drivers. So police would pull us over. A lot of people see the United States as a country, but when you work there, you'll very quickly realize it's actually 50 separate states flying in loose formation.
Absolutely.
And every state has its own laws, its own they do so little at the federal level. And you get back to Australia and you're like, oh, thank goodness. We have it so good here.
Yeah.
But what that meant was, if you're picking up, let's say you're picking up some wastes in Nebraska, right? And then you take it down through Ohio, Oklahoma, back up, Kansas, and then back up into Illinois and Indiana and Illinois. That stuff you pick up in Nebraska, you need 6 sets of paperwork for, one for every state you're going through. And then, 5 and then 4 and then 3.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
as
it
you're
does.
going. So they're going out with folders like this. And the police would pull them over and they want to see all of the paperwork. You're bringing this stuff into our state, And so our drivers had a hard time. So the lawyer, I got 2 lawyers over in Virginia, and they sat down and they went through the Department of Transport laws in every one of the 48 contiguous states.
Yep.
Put it in the wiki in a format that the truck drivers could use. And in the end, the police wouldn't touch our trucks.
Because they knew.
You pull them over, they're going to pull out the thing, they're going to pull out their phone, they're on the wiki, and they're like, what's the problem, officer?
Amazing.
What would you like to know?
Okay.
No, you actually legally can't ask me that. Yes, and here's the details, and there's the documentation, and here's the sheets from that hospital. And they were like, yeah, these guys have got it sorted,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
And so that's knowledge management to me,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Another story up in Sydney. We had a situation where we had two of the best salespeople I've ever worked with. Oscar especially, I just love the guy.
Yep.
And he's gone on to great success. He's a very, very good salesman. But we had a situation where Sydney was doing like 60% of the sales of the country.
Okay.
And the CEO was like, listen, I need you to come down to Melbourne and go up to Brisbane and teach the salespeople in Melbourne and Brisbane how to sell so we can lift up and get them as good as you. You obviously know what you're doing.
Obviously a salesman.
You're nailing this, right?
Yeah, obviously a salesman.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, yeah, look, we're too busy. We can't come. We just don't have time and blah, blah, blah. So the CEO asked multiple times. And eventually he goes, listen, come down to Melbourne. You'll come down on the Wednesday night. You'll train the guys Thursday and Friday. Friday afternoon, I'm going to fly your wives down. I'm putting you up in the Hilton for the weekend. I'm giving you a box at the MCG, and you've got my credit card for the whole weekend. Eat wherever you want, do whatever you want.
So this is the CEO telling the top sales guys.
The top sales guys.
Okay, I thought he was talking to you, but
No.
go on. Yep.
Wouldn't that be lovely? No, he's trying to get these sales guys. Wouldn't come. So he's had enough. CEO is over it. So he says to me,
Something's
all right,
going on.
I want you to get up to Sydney. You're the knowledge manager. I want you to learn how they're getting those sales. And then I want you to write that down, and I want you to train the salespeople in Sydney and Brisbane. So I said, well, that's not what a knowledge manager does, but I will solve your problem.
Okay.
So the next morning I jumped on a plane. I flew up. Well, not next morning, but I called the next morning. And what I did is I used a bit of go strategy, right? So I called the largest customer in the state, who I knew Oscar was all over like a rash. And I knew, because I also managed the systems, that they had a request for a special report to be written because of new government reporting regime.
Okay.
So I called up.
Are you allowed to disclose what they're selling, what this company does?
I won't do that, but
Okay.
it's in the medical arena.
Okay.
So anyway, I then went in, booked a time with their head of management,
Yep.
and then I called Oscar, and I said, Oscar, don't need anything from you. This is just a courtesy call. I'm coming up to Sydney next week, and I'm going to be meeting with such and such from
Yeah.
St Vincent's Hospital, right? He goes, no, you are not. Across the road from the hospital is this cafe. You will meet me there at 8:30, and I will take you in to see him. You are not seeing my customer without me.
Yeah.
No problem. Hey, that'd be
course.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Hey, as long as I'm not wasting your time, but that'd be wonderful, right? So I turn up. I said, listen, since I'm coming up, why don't we see a couple of your customers? I hardly get to Sydney. It'd be great to meet them. So we saw 5 customers, me and him, spent the whole day together.
Yeah.
Started talking about what's going on with and all that sort of stuff. At 11 o'clock that night, on drink number 8, I found out the problem.
What was the problem?
There was a $200,000 sales bonus for the country. These 2 guys were taken home 60% of that on top of their wage.
Not bad.
If they taught the other states to sell, they'd get a pay cut. This wasn't a knowledge problem. This was a bonus problem.
Jeez.
So I went straight back to Melbourne. I sat down with the CFO, who was great. He totally understood the problem. And I love it when I work with managers who they're open to understanding the knowledge side of things,
Yeah.
right? So I'm saying this is a behavioral issue that's coming from a bonus issue, not a knowledge hoarding problem, right?
Yeah.
They are hoarding knowledge, but
Because
not
of-
willingly,
yeah.
right? So he and I convinced the CEO to change it to an uncapped bonus.
How difficult was
So
that?
based on the total sales, took 6 months to get in. It wasn't
Okay.
easy. And we looked at the psychology of what was going on here, and I was like, no, don't just do that. Let's use that negative as a positive. So we split the bonus in half. 50% of the bonus is based on your sales, 50% is based on the national sales.
Okay.
Now, if they help the rest of the country's sales, their bonus goes up.
And was it capped still?
No,
No, you removed the cap.
uncapped.
Uncapped.
That
There
was
you
the
go.
hard bit selling to the CEO because he didn't want to give his money away.
Yeah.
But we're like, you're not going to make this money anyway.
Yep.
So it's extra money. You're just giving away some of the profit from the extra money. And we eventually got him over the line. And we saw a massive increase in profits to the point where they ended up selling the Australian business for an unholy amount of money, which launched them internationally to now, I believe they're closing in on $1 billion turnover a year.
Amazing.
Right, an amazing company, incredible CEO,
Yeah.
just one of those natural born business people.
Yeah.
Just photographic memory, and who knows what his IQ is. He always had me on my toes, keeping up with him.
Yeah.
But you can see where I'm going with knowledge,
Yes,
right?
of
It's not
course.
we're not just writing stuff down or sticking it in a database. We're looking at the business problem and going, what are the knowledge inputs and outputs here? What's the capability we need from a human perspective? And not just in training, but what can they actually do? Who are the masters? Who are the ones that you call when things really go wrong? And how do we start building communities of practice or transferring or doing, mentoring sessions? Or what do we do with onboarding?
Yeah.
And how are we actually ensuring that capability continues? And as you know, I now work for a government regulator. That regulator is a safety regulator responsible for the lives of apprentices, of the public, and also people who work in the energy industry, whether it's gas, electricity, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right? We need to keep those people safe.
Absolutely.
And so we have a number of people. We're a small agency, only 250 people.
Mm-hmm.
So you've seen in organisations,
Yeah.
you have contractors come and go, people come and go. 250 is not many, and
It's
you can
not many.
easily have a bottleneck where that lady is the only one that knows how to do this.
I'm still seeing this today, Stuart, where, a lot of contractors, it's just the nature of the game with transformation projects. Contractors are there for 3, 4, 5 years,
Yep.
and their contract
And they
finish
walk
up
up and they leave.
and they leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all that knowledge just goes out the window, and then they're scrambling, issues happen, production issues happen, they don't know how to fix it.
Yeah.
It's a whole hoo-ha.
It is. So that's why a lot of my role is actually sitting in working groups and on committees with other people. So I'm the guy that normally sits there not saying anything, and then all of a sudden I'll suggest something and I'll pipe up and say, well, hold on, who are the current domain knowledge holders in that area? If you make that change and use a contractor, you've got to understand when that contractor leaves, he takes the knowledge with him.
Yep.
Who will be left holding the ability to maintain that? And this happened just on Wednesday.
Okay.
So I'm having those conversations a lot not because people are stupid, they've never
Thought
looked at
about
it through
yeah.
the knowledge lens.
So how do you mitigate that risk? If they decide, okay, look, the contractor's got the expertise today
Yeah.
to implement this change, how do you mitigate that risk?
So get them to do train the trainer sessions, get them to coach your local people, right? One of the ways you transfer tacit knowledge, which is that, do you understand tacit knowledge?
Yeah, I think I do,
So
but
that,
explain
that
it.
stuff you have, tacit knowledge is the stuff you really struggle to write down, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
My mum makes scones, what do you want to call them?
Yep.
And I remember she'd come up from the milking shed and they wouldn't be finished yet. She'd whip together some scones, throw them in the oven, go back, finish off milking with Dad, right? I remember standing in the thing covered in caviar.
Yeah.
And I would boom, and she'd come out and they would be perfect. Now, I have the explicit knowledge of her scones. I have the recipe. That's the written knowledge, right? I've got that.
How's your scones?
Terrible. They're like little rocks. They're like, I could play skip on the water with them. And so there's something in her tacit knowledge about how she executes that is beyond my knowledge. Now, I've learnt one thing. When you cut the scones out of the dough, don't twist. Push straight down.
Simple as that.
Now, how do I know that?
Because you shadowed her, or?
She shadowed me.
Oh.
And she went, no, don't twist. And I'm
There you
like,
go.
that's not written down. What do you mean don't twist it? And sure enough, they were better. They were this eye instead of this eye.
There you
So I
go.
was halfway there. So the point is
I've
that
got
tacit knowledge.
I've got a similar story I'll share with you,
Yeah,
right?
please.
So, my mum makes a beautiful potato curry, and but I've got the knowledge of how she does it, what ingredients she put in her curry powder, turmeric, cinnamons, curry leaves, and a bunch of other stuff. Put them in. My gravy is watery, and it's terrible. I'm going, what's going on here? So I shadowed her. I'm going, what are you doing, Mum? And just before she takes it off the stove, she doesn't even realize she's doing it. She'd squashed the potatoes within the curry itself, therefore thickening the gravy
And releasing the starch.
and releasing the starch. And so the gravy's really thick. And that's what you want. It's not written down. I didn't know about it. And she doesn't intuitively, she doesn't realize.
It's just done it for years.
There you go.
Absolutely.
So similar example, I suppose.
Yeah,
but
yeah, very much. And so this is where you talk about knowledge is it's important how you define it, because it's not just a cognitive function, right? It exists amongst groups of people, and it exists over generations.
Yep.
And so there's the famous story of the little girl who asks her mum why every time they have a roast lamb they cut the end of the lamb off.
I
right?
know. So,
And they go back to Nonna in Sicily and it finds out, no, it's just because she had a small oven, right?
yeah.
It was nothing to do with, it didn't make it
It
taste
didn't
any
make a
better,
difference,
right?
yeah.
And so those knowledge, good and bad, can be passed on. That's one of the exciting bits about AI, because you can take your knowledge, which is critical, your human knowledge, but then you can validate it against AI, which will open up a thing you didn't realize. Because there's a thing called anti-expertise. And that's where you're so confident in what you know, you stop watching the environment and asking questions and experimenting. Yeah? So that can be as bad as
Not knowing.
not knowing,
Yeah.
right? So managing that's important. And so I'm looking for that. When I'm managing knowledge in an organization, I'm watching for that stultification,
Yeah.
where we're not doing it anymore. It was important to be explicit about that stuff, because diversity doesn't happen automatically. So often brigades would have men and women, but they put the women in the second truck. So you'd encourage them, hey, listen, and now some of them, like Nuri, the captain of Nuri is a lady and she is phenomenal, right? So we've broken down some of these barriers so that we're now getting everyone participating, not just a certain subset.
Absolutely.
And that's lovely to see.
Yeah.
Lovely to see from a diversity and inclusion point of view. But for me as a knowledge manager, that diversity and inclusion is critical to get the knowledge flowing. You can see that in that example, right? If
Absolutely.
you're not physically in the truck,
How are you supposed
it doesn't
to
matter
share?
how willing they are to share. You're not physically there. You're in another truck.
Yeah.
And so creating those environments is what I call gardening. Remember we talked about the bush before?
Yep.
So pruning is good, and an information focus will prune, but the knowledge focus thinks about sun and shade, thinks about fertilizer, thinks about co-planting with other species, so that the plants naturally grow the way you want them to. Healthy, lots of fruit.
How do you sort of push back kindly on organizations that you go, hey, we just need a new system? Give us a new system, Stu, because that way we can put all the knowledge there and we're done. Why are you wasting your time?
I've never heard that before. Of course, that's where everyone starts.
Yeah.
So you've got to, as a knowledge manager, you've very quickly just got to accept that's not
That's their
them
default
doing the wrong
position.
thing. That's part of the learning journey to what knowledge is. There's a like a, what would you call it? It's not really a theory. It's just a little model called DIKW. Have you heard of that?
No.
So it's Russell Ackoff back in the 50s. He coined this thing of data becomes information, becomes knowledge, becomes wisdom.
Yep.
DIKW.
Okay.
Right? So the more data you have, the more information you'll have. The more information you'll have, the better knowledge you'll have. The better knowledge you have, the more wise decisions you'll make.
Okay.
And the wise people you'll have.
Yep.
It's complete rubbish.
Okay.
It's not only wrong, it's bad because it leads people
To
to
think
think
that-
about knowledge and information wrong.
Okay.
Knowledge isn't just lots of information. So you realize that and you're like, right, let's ban DIKW, let's get rid of it. The problem is DIKW is one of the best ways for people to get on the knowledge management bandwagon because they start realizing, oh, they're different things. Oh, I need to manage these because they're different stages. Well, no, they're not different stages, but you do need to manage them differently. So it gets them on the Ferris wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then as they get older and they get more mature, they abandon those little models because they're not in line with theory, with the understanding of the science and cognitive science, neuroscience. But we don't want to get rid of it because it helps. So likewise, we need a database for all our knowledge. I'm okay with that because most managers, most people with a degree, every person with an MBA thinks that way. They're taught to think that way.
Yep.
Right? I taught the KM program for La Trobe University in their MBA program. And it was the last one they did before they finished. So they've been doing this big, 12 subject MBA, and I'm the last one. And so 12 weeks long, the first 6 weeks were deprogramming all the junk they've been taught. And the second 6 weeks was like, now you understand what knowledge actually is. Let's talk about how you do it. And it was just so sad to me that they were taught to think of knowledge as an asset similar to any other accounting asset. And that you would manage it the same way you manage an information asset.
Okay.
Right?
That's interesting you say that. So what's the relationship that you see between a knowledge manager and a change manager?
It's a great question. It's a great question. So remember I said how knowledge managers are like gardeners? So we've got to create the culture and the environment. Change management is absolutely critical to do that. Mm-hmm. Right? You can't just drag people along or force them or say, here's your new system and turn the old system off and bad luck, you've just got to use the new one.
Yeah.
Right? Running away from bad doesn't make good.
Of course. Yep.
And so you've got to craft and engineer and design that good place to where you've got little what's in it for me feedback loops going on all over the place.
Absolutely.
And now people want to do the right thing. Why would you do it that way? This is so much easier.
Yeah.
And if you do it that way, you'd have to do all the record stuff yourself. With this, you just put it in and it's done. Yeah.
Yep, you nailed it. It's
And
what's
now
in it for me.
you've got compliance, you've got collaboration, you've got visibility of the information assets across the organisation. You've now got something you can do succession planning with for your new people coming in. And one of the cool things we do is, with onboarding stuff, if we can set up a wiki or a site in SharePoint to do that, then what you do is when you get your new onboarder, their task is to update that wiki or update that site. So they've got to go and introduce themselves and ask about the processes and make sure that the thing's up to date. And in the process, they meet everyone.
Love it. I love it. That's amazing.
Right?
Yep. So I hope whoever's listening to this are noting down these key points because that's golden. That's golden.
So we've been talking for a long while. We probably should start finishing up. So let me go back to the neurospicy comment at the start.
Okay.
When my son was 2.5 years old, within 2 days, his eyes completely crossed. We were in the ear, nose and throat hospital down here and really worried that he was going to go blind or something like that.
You and your wife are worried.
Yeah, we were really worried. And anyway, it turned out that it was a birth defect and his eyes were built in a way that his brain had to use all its power just to keep them straight.
Okay.
For 2.5 years, and eventually the muscles just gave out.
Wow.
In that process, though, his brain had been doing that while our brain was learning binocular vision. So he has no depth perception,
Okay.
right? So he couldn't play soccer, couldn't kick a ball, couldn't kick a football because he couldn't tell where it was in space, right? Couldn't catch a tennis ball.
Yeah. I know there's a happy ending to this, but
Yeah, yeah,
continue.
yeah. So anyway, he gets a bit older and I hear this massive bang. This is before I go to work, from out the back. And then another bang. And I go out and he's got my ice hockey stick and the puck. And he is slap-shotting the puck into this big wooden oak door. And it's bouncing back to him and he's hitting it again. And I'm like, you can't tell depth. How do you know where that puck is? And then the mapping person inside me says, because it's on a flat surface. It's two-dimensional, not three-dimensional.
Okay.
So we tested that, and sure enough, as long as the soccer ball was on the ground, he could kick it. The second it lifted off, he was done.
Right.
So we're like, okay, well, we've got a friend that plays inline hockey. We'll go and play inline hockey. So he started, and we suspect because of his eyesight issue, his reflexes were like a cat. And that led into him becoming Australian captain in the inline hockey, and then moving on to ice hockey. And then when he finished year 12, he went to Canada for a year and played junior A ice hockey.
Are you serious?
So there was a whole thing that he did.
Yeah.
As you do as a dad, you become a coach through that process. Only I was a bit different because I had no sporting background and was doing a master's degree in KM and complexity theory. So all that's happened at the same time. So we got a guy on our team. I won't say his name, but I hold this guy dear to my heart. He and his little brother came from way the heck out the other side of Geelong and trained with us each week at Bayswater and played all over Melbourne with the team. He had a fairly high level of Asperger's.
Okay.
He was as neurospicy as you get,
Okay.
to the point where he was thrown out of school. He had trouble reading and writing. He would refuse to eat anything except banana muffins. That was the only food he would eat.
Could you define, just based on your understanding, neurospicy for those who
Sure.
aren't unfamiliar
Yeah, sure.
with it?
So he was diagnosed with a level of autism.
Okay.
They don't call it Asperger's anymore because of the negative connotations of the German scientists behind that name. But it's a level of autism where you are reasonably high functioning, but you have very low social abilities. So you don't pick up on social cues. You cannot place yourself in another person's emotional shoes or position.
Okay.
You don't pick up when people are happy or angry with you. You don't like anybody touching you.
Got it.
But this kid could play.
Yeah.
Boy, could he play. And I remember there was a situation where he and his brother, and this is very common with ASD kids, they don't get along with their siblings very well. They're very hard on their siblings because they just don't look at the world through their siblings' eyes, right?
Yep.
And so he treated his little brother terribly. And I talked to him about it, but it's just a function of who he is. It's emergent.
Yeah.
And anyway, I had him standing beside me. And if you can imagine the rink there, and so we were up this end of it, and they're all playing, and the puck was down this end in the corner. There's a bunch of kids that had sort of got caught up, and they're all trying to dig the puck out between their feet, right? And the little brother comes off for a change-up. And my guy, he goes out, and of course, massive shoulder hit because brothers. Yeah. And anyway, he does a turn and burn. So when you skate, actually the fastest way to accelerate is to actually crank yourself over and cross over. And as you accelerate and turn, you are doing 40k an hour by the time you finish that turn.
Okay.
In the space of 8 meters, right? It's incredible how quick you can take off. So he goes flying down the rink. He gets halfway down the rink, does a full hockey stop.
Yep.
And on this side of the rink is the ref. And he sprints straight at the ref. And I'm thinking, what did the ref say? Are we all about to go to jail?
Okay.
Because he's not always in charge of what he's doing, right? Yep. As he does that, the puck bounces off a skate, bounces behind the goal, bounces off this corner, and comes straight to him, and he puts a one-time shot on goal.
Wow.
The little brother, who's constantly talking to me about his idiot older brother and how can he play like this, turns to me and says, "What the was that?" And I had to say, listen, you got to understand, right? His brain doesn't work like a normal brain.
Yeah.
Okay? He's obviously skating along, and for whatever reason, somewhere in here, not up here, down here, has said, I reckon there's an 82% chance that puck's coming around the back of the goal. So I need to be over here to catch it.
Amazing.
I said, his little brother was Brent. I said, Brent, our brains do that. But we're so busy up here, we can't hear it. He doesn't just hear it, he immediately listens to it. Right?
That's awesome. Yeah.
As a complexity scientist, I thought, how do I apply this? So what we did, this is my last story. What we did is we started updates. Let's call him Adam. So it was Adam's updates. So at quarter time in the match, we would come in, everyone knew you don't say a word, you get your water bottle, you sit down, and Adam is going to sit there and he's going to tell you what he saw on the rink, the patterns. Every time Brent comes down the middle, Kylie goes down the edge, right? And Brent crashes the slot ready for the pass up from the red line.
So he's seeing all
So he's seeing all these patterns. That's how he was doing what he's doing.
Yeah.
Because to him, it's not individual players and a
He's
puck flying
seeing
around.
it.
He's seeing, these are patterns that are forming and unforming like ribbons
That's so
on
cool.
the rink, right?
All
So I picked up that he was doing this.
yeah.
So I had this update. So he would tell everyone what they're doing. And then we, not me,
Would-
the team would have a discussion about if that's what's happening, how would we stop that as a team? And I use complexity theory. So then they would talk about it, they put ideas up, and then I would boil that down to a simple rule that they could all follow that would emergently create the shape we needed to stop that happening.
If that happens, do this. So forth. Okay.
Correct. So one of those shapes, for example, was beach balls. So I don't know whether you remember, but when I was growing up, we had Coca-Cola ads, and there'd be all these beautiful young people on the beach, and they would have these big blow-up balls, and they would get in them, and they would run in the surf in these big Coca-Cola clear plastic balls, right?
Yep.
I thought they were fantastic. So I said, right, so I showed them the ad, and I said, imagine you are all in one of those balls, okay? Imagine every other opposition player is one of those balls, all right? If you're going to pass to someone, you need to be able to see them between the opposition's beach balls.
Okay. Yep.
Never pass through the opposition's beach balls. Likewise, if somebody else has got the puck, right, and you want them to pass to you, you need to move to a place on the rink where you can see them between the beach balls,
Got it. Yep.
right? They call this, in ice hockey terms, they call this opening up the lanes, right?
Yep.
But that's technical for 12-year-old kids, right? So we talk beach balls. So now, all of a sudden, all of the other coaches are tearing their hairs out because everything they try, we adapt to, and they can't work out what our plays are, what our strategies are. Because we don't have strategies, we have emergent properties from strange attractors inside boundary conditions.
Oh my God.
We won 2 state championships, 2 state premierships,
Jeez.
and we were not the best team. We had one of the top players. We had one Australian player in our team. It was incredible to see that work, and it was such a justification of complexity theory being in use when you deal with teams of human beings
Yep. Yep.
that are creating amazing work, that are doing stuff, that are achieving goals.
Incredible.
You can create ways of influencing that aren't direct rules, and because they're like that, because they're emergent, because they're not emergent, the rules are rules, right? The beach ball was a clear thing that I told them, but the way they applied that changed every play. They were following the same rules, but it was emerging differently on the rink and completely unstoppable by the opposition team.
Amazing. Amazing. I know we are running out of time, but I do want to ask you one other question,
Right.
which is, and that was an awesome story, by the way. I loved it.
By the way, the inside of that was in teaching him, in coaching Adam.
Yeah.
I started reading about it and started realizing my cues.
Yeah, there you go.
And so that's how I started
Started putting
understanding,
this
oh,
together.
okay, so I'm I'm not normal either. So there you go. So it was great that I got that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. My question is about the difference between knowledge management and records management.
Yeah.
The reason why I ask this question is every organization I've personally worked in, records management is a fairly common thing.
Yeah.
They seem to think that they're the center of the world. I often am volunteered by the project manager and so forth to deal with them.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to deal with them the best I can. But how do you differentiate the two? How do you make everything work? How do you try and go, hey, records management is important, but we got to do this?
Right. Yeah, it's good. It's a great question. And as you know, the records team reports to me at my current role. So for me, they're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
So a lot of knowledge management is writing stuff down, even though we don't highlight that, and it's not our first play. But if you want to overcome those tyrannies of distance or those tyrannies of time zones, you've got to use technologies to do that in some form or another. Now, especially in government departments, you have a requirement to manage records, right? In fact, in government departments, the records manager has a secondary role, which is records officer, and that's actually a government post. The government department is not allowed to exist without a records officer, right?
There you go. I didn't know that.
So if you're dealing with the records manager, you should notice that they have two voices. One voice is the fun voice talking to you about stuff. The other voice is the serious voice. When you get the serious voice from a records manager, they're not talking to you.
Yeah.
The records officer is. Pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay?
And you know what? I've seen this because every records person that I've dealt with is worried about some catastrophe that no one else in the organization really care about.
Correct.
They just want to get on with their life. But the records manager, either they've been through a massive audit, something's happened.
Yeah. Sure. But this is not just records management, right? In an oil rig, the gas safety officer has the same problem. He's always warning against the whole rig blowing up. How often does a rig blow up? Once every 3 or 4 decades?
Yep.
But a lot more would happen if they weren't doing their job, right?
Absolutely.
So likewise with records management. But why I say two sides of the same coin is records management, if you look at the prof guidelines, it's not just about recording what happened so that we can sue you one day. That's not records management. If you read the guidelines, it's also about stopping reinventing the wheel, which is wasting public money, right? So if you do something, record what you did so we can reuse that, so we can learn from it, so we can improve.
Reuse.
It's just, the problem is, and I'm sure you've seen this, managers go, yeah, I get that, but what do you have to do? And of course, what they have to do, what the Prov Act says you have to do, is you have to write stuff down and keep it in a database and keep it for so many years and everything. So they do that and they fund that, but any then reuse of that or integration into enterprise search or overlapping that with your expertise management and everything else, they don't do. That's where knowledge management comes into it.
Amazing.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, amazing.
So knowledge management, I love it when I work with records managers because normally I have to do the lot.
Yeah.
When I've got a good records manager like I do now, I can let her be excellent.
Yep.
And then I just do the other half. Right, how do we reuse that?
Yeah,
How do we find those things?
Yep.
If this happened, we'd need an incident control team to do that. How would they get access to that information, which is now 16 years old, by the way? Yeah.
And she is excellent, I know. And you know what? Every single records manager I've met, very passionate. They are excellent, 100%.
Yeah.
So you're right. That's actually a really good distinction in the way you explained it.
So maybe it's kind of like maths. So in school they teach you maths, but most schools teach maths terribly. They teach maths like you'd teach music by teaching the little black lines and the staves, but never actually playing any actual music to the student. Just teach them the maths of music, right? So maths they teach the same way. They don't teach counting pigs or calculating the number of leaves on a tree by the branching factor.
Yep.
They just teach you these numbers on a page, boring as anything, right? Well, records has the same problem. They're just doing the boring bit and they're leaving out the awesome bit where we just saved 6 apprentices' lives because we found this thing and we knew they were doing it, and we picked that up and we saw the pattern and we went in there with a safety audit and we caught them in the act with this huge machine with no safety guards on it. Right?
Oh my God, that is so good.
Do you get it?
I just got it. I'm serious.
That's knowledge management.
That's it. I hope whoever's listening to this got that, because that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. We've covered a lot of topics. Anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
No, I think that's about it. I mean, I touched on the diversity and inclusion part. That culture of kindness and respect, and just treating other people in your organisation like they were doing the best they could.
Absolutely. Yep.
Is absolutely critical if you want to create a culture positive, knowledge positive culture.
Yep.
And it's amazing how people look at computer systems, they look at strategies and structures and restructures and all these things to try and fix their culture problems, when in fact a lot of it's coming from just a base lack of kindness and respect amongst their people.
Amazing.
So major on that minor, right? And hopefully a lot of the things that I have to come in and surgically cut out, you'll never have to worry about.
Okay. So for those who don't know Stuart, follow him on LinkedIn.
Yep. My blog is deltaknowledge.net.
Any other places?
And I pop up all over the place. I'm the Australian delegate for the Knowledge Management Global Network. And we've been running the Knowledge Management Leaders Forum, which is the Melbourne Forum. That's been running every month since 1998. And I've been one of the co-organisers of that since 2009. We meet once a month, the fourth Wednesday of every month. And if you're interested in this, if some of this is ringing bells, you have no idea what knowledge management is, but you'd like to learn more and hang around some people who do this on a daily basis, just to pick up and supplement your own practice as a change manager, as an IT manager, as a developer, then please come along.
Okay. Right?
The complexity series side totally overlaps with agile development.
Amazing.
So there's a lot of holding hands there.
Yep.
And being in an environment, a safe environment like Knowledge Management Leadership Forum, it really gives you a space where you can throw ideas out there and people will gently say, well, have you thought about it this way? And just guide you. And that's how I learned. I was mentored through some of the old oaks of KMLF. And you can find that on Meetup at Melbourne KMLF.
Awesome. Thank you so much. One more story if you can. One last thing, I promise. I remember you telling a story about fuel and how Melbourne's dry and it's a perfect condition. Can you I just thought it was fascinating. I never thought about how, why we have bushfires and so forth. Why is that? And I know this is
a good question.
This is not related to knowledge, but I just never thought about it like that.
Yeah, because Victoria is the third most dangerous fire state in the world. So the south of Spain is the worst.
Okay.
Closely followed by California. And then Victoria is number 3. And the reason that you'd think Queensland would be, that's where it's hot, right?
I never knew that, yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, up in Queensland, they don't get the actual undergrowth as much as we get. So because we're cooler in the winter, we get that growth. Yeah. Now, Tasmania gets even more.
Okay.
But Tasmania doesn't fully dry out. So Victoria is just in that sweet spot where we get lots of growth and lots of drying out. And it's dry growth that creates the fuel.
There you go.
And that fuel load goes up and up and up year by year. If you live in a rural area, I really encourage you to get in touch with the CFA, see if they need any help. They don't necessarily need firefighters. Maybe they just need someone to make good scones for their training nights. Maybe they need someone to maintain the radios every now and then, or to help them with their social media. There's lots of things you can do to help out, and the work they do in their communities is really incredible. It's
amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for your generous time. And I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate it. Good luck with the Dublin trip.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Mr. Stuart French, thank you so much.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you, buddy.